Welcome, guys, to another episode of the Compliance Chronicles. Today, we're joined by a guest who is no stranger to compliance. I'm going to read out her bio as an intro so I don't make a mistake and get anything wrong and do her justice, I hope. So, she's a chartered accountant, she's a chartered tax advisor, and has worked for one of the big four auditing firms. However, since 2017, she has been working in HR management. She has a passion for HR and is also now a fractional director and a consultant in HR. She has her own consultancy, HR consultancy, supporting businesses in building strong people functions. And she brings a wealth of experience and strategic awareness and skill and hands-on expertise around HR and accounting. She's also a co-host of her own podcast, Everybody Hates HR, with over 100 episodes to date, making waves in HR space. So we're thrilled to have her on to discuss HR and compliance, the crossover, what people think about HR in compliance, what people think about compliance in HR, and the crossovers and potentially misconceptions. So first and foremost, welcome, Lola.
Thank you. You did a good job.
Did I?
Yeah, really good job.
Oh,
how much did Lola
I was
pay
like,
you?
who's that? Who's that girl?
How much did you get paid for that introduction?
So I had a question for you, Lola, but my first question, just to hopefully break the ice, and that is, what does it feel like working in the only role that's probably more disliked than compliance?
Oof. It just depends, really. I mean, compliance, I feel like sometimes, like, you guys are doing things and everyone's just like, ugh. Whereas HR, when we do things, people are like, ugh, but they don't say it to our face because they're too scared, So it feels all right. Like, I love working in HR. Like, I recognize that I'm super privileged to be in a job that I really enjoy and that I really like. And obviously there's parts of it that, like, they're not so fun, but there's parts of it that are really, really, really interesting. You get to do really cool things. You get to impact people's, like, employee experience. And we all spend so much time at work. So to be able to impact that journey positively is good. And also keep your company out of trouble. It's quite good as well.
Yeah, and I guess that's when we talk about compliance and HR as we go through the episode, there's the similarities, right? Where both kind of departments are trying to keep the company out of trouble in different ways. And so you've got your own podcast. I've also seen that you've been on many other podcasts. Have you ever discussed compliance and the impact of compliance in HR, vice versa, in any of these previous podcasts? And also, could you give us kind of, in the same sense of that, kind of a breakdown of your backstory around, going from accounting, how compliance potentially looked like in accounting compared to HR, and kind of how it looks in HR?
I've never actually discussed, like, HR and as it specifically pertains to compliance, but a lot of HR is compliance.
Yeah.
So I guess if compliance was the overarching umbrella, you might have, like, HR, health and safety, data protection. Like, HR is a lot of other things, but there's a big part of it that is compliance. And I mean, it fits quite well with what I was doing before. So I used to be a tax advisor. So I studied accounting and finance, decided to go into accounting and finance. I worked at Deloitte. I joined as a graduate, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And I was there for 5 years. And during that time, I studied to be a chartered accountant and then also a chartered tax advisor. But tax is, like, almost all compliance. Like, we used to have legislation on our desks. Like, when we used to advise clients, we had these big red books. We used them in exams, but we used to use them at work. So a client would, ask us a query, and even if we know the answer, like, they used to drill it into us. What part of the legislation? So we would literally open ITPA, like, whatever legislation that is. Employment tax was what I specialized in. And we would literally have to find it and be like, okay, that's the law. That's what we have to do. So, like, when moving into HR and having to think about all these different laws and having to understand, like, employment law, there's parts of it had crossover, but it wasn't new to me. And I love employment law. Like, a big part of what we do on the podcast is dissecting cases. So usually when companies have done the wrong thing and they haven't complied with the law, they get taken to tribunal and they have to pay a lot of money. And we talk about that a lot on the podcast. So, like, I don't necessarily think of HR as compliance, but it really is.
Yeah.
That leads me to a good question. So you're talking about tribunals.
I think it's a good question first and foremost.
I'm sure it's a great question.
Because I thought of it. So it leads me on to a question, which might be good. you mentioned about tribunals and companies going to tribunals. After they've been to tribunals or they've been on the receiving end of enforcement action, what's the typical reaction for HR? Like, is it, so I suppose word it differently. Can a company get punished externally by a regulator, and then subsequently HR step in and say, well, alongside that, we're also going to do our own investigation and take action against the employees?
Um, if there is, I mean, usually they're two separate things, right? So, give you an example, like in law, you've got the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and then you've got just the normal law that governs it. If a lawyer has been caught doing something bad, they can be disciplined by their company, by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and then that employee can also, like, if they did something bad to another employee, that employee could then also take them to tribunal. So it could be like they could get it from all sides.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it just really depends on what the actual non-compliance was and who catches it, what the implications of it are. Yeah, and if the employee decides to take it any further as well.
Yeah, I suppose, because the reason I ask is, so we do a lot of work in the gambling industry, and what you'll see, for example, is enforcement action is quite common for a gambling business.
What is enforcement action?
Yeah,
So
good
that,
question.
so for the enforcement action in the gambling industry, typically will result in a financial penalty. So
Can
so
I
a
step in
gambling
just to break down even further. So
he does this
no, because
every single
for
time.
Yeah, but I
somebody,
actually don't know.
yeah.
So
So
anything you can
enforcement
teach
action
me.
comes off the back of compliance failing. So where an organization, a firm, fails in their compliance obligations or requirements, there is often a penalty. It could be a fine, could be some special measures, some actions they got to take. And that's what we call it. That's what's called enforcement action. So whatever the action that is being enforced as a consequence of the non-compliance is enforcement action. So
Is it who regulates it?
so again, various sectors that we work in. So for example, in financial services, it'll be the Financial Conduct Authority, FCA. Within the gambling sector, it will be the UK Gambling Commission.
Okay.
If they're a UK business.
If they're UK business, we also work with like companies who have licenses across different jurisdictions. So it would just be their regulatory body that oversees the adherence of regulations, rules, and stuff in that jurisdiction. So yeah, like the SRA, FCA, FSA. We work with many of those.
Yeah. So to simplify, if we use the UK as an example, UK businesses or gambling operators have to follow the LCCP, so the Licensing Conditions Code of Practice, and the Gambling Act, as well as some other like surrounding regulations. For marketing, they've got to follow advertising standards, etc. So if an operator has an audit, so an external, the regulator comes in and does an assessment. If they fail, like Ray said, they have breaches, they will then go down the enforcement route, which will typically result in unless they've got exceptional compliance standards. In the UK, it's common for operators to come out the wrong end of an audit.
If they knock at your door, you're probably going to get something.
Yeah, you normally do get something. I mean, it's quite common. Like we've worked with a few operators who've come out the end of an audit or an assessment with special measures, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, or they've come out the end of it where they've got to develop an action plan and follow that for for several months. But more often than not, there will be a settlement, which is like a fine, but it's the Gambling Commission saying we don't think you're compliant and you've breached these 7 points. Offer us a settlement, essentially. And we've had settlements in the UK of £17 million, and then some, there was one, I think most recently, which was, £700,000. So it does really vary. And normally at the end of that, so let's say X gambling company X received enforcement action of, you've got to pay a settlement of £10 million. Because you failed for anti-money laundering and you failed to protect consumers. Those members of staff who fail to implement correct policies and procedures, they will normally 9 times out of 10 still be in their jobs afterwards.
So they won't would they have disciplinary action, or is it considered to be more of a company failing than an individual failing?
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of what I was
question for you.
Okay,
so
I would say, just based on, I've never worked in gambling. Just based on that, I would be like, you'd have to actually look at what happened. Like, who is the person in the company who is responsible for setting, the pros, for overseeing it? So, for instance, data protection, the DPO. Yeah. Like, that person is responsible for, like, data protection.
GDPR,
and making sure that together as a company, but ultimately accountable. So it just depends on exactly what it was and what happened. But if it is a fundamental, like if there's something you're supposed to do in your job, so let's say you have some KYC checks that you're supposed to do and you don't do them, hopefully it's flagged later down the line, but that's negligence on you. If it's like negligence on your part, then it might be that your manager didn't catch it. So maybe it's your manager who's ultimately responsible for the team that is going to get in trouble. Maybe they might not get fired, but there might be disciplinary action or some sort of investigation into how this was able to happen. Was it a genuine process failure where you don't have the right process in place, or was it negligence on behalf of an individual person? That's what I would be looking at in this when I'm doing my fact finding in the investigation, because in theory that could be a conduct failure or a performance failure, but it just depends like on what the actual facts of the situation would be.
Yeah, I would say so. Typically, in using the gambling industry as an example, because gambling companies are competing against each other and it's a commercial business, a lot of the times it seems that the guidance that comes from the regulator is not 100% clear, and it can be interpreted different ways. So, for example, you're told to apply certain anti-money laundering or safer gambling rules. If you speak to 10 different operators, they'll normally have 10 different ways of how they've interpreted that guidance. So they'll do some things similar because it's legal, like, they all have to do, conduct PEP and sanctions check. That's a legal requirement. But anything within the regulation, or not anything, but a lot of things within the regulation in terms of
open for interpretation.
Like, that if a customer spends a high amount of money, you should verify their source of wealth. But what he thinks is a high amount of money might be different to what I think is a high amount of money. So that's why I think operators tend to get it wrong from the regulator's perspective, because sometimes the guidance is just too open to interpretation.
So where there's a big overlap between HR and compliance is training. And that's another thing that that is really important. So for instance, in the roles that I take, so I typically work with startups and scale ups, usually companies that don't have their own HR team. So I'll come in and be the, I don't know, interim people director, and maybe my advisor comes with me and we're their temporary HR team and they have that person 2 days a week or whatever. Or maybe they have a HR team and I'm just like going to be a bolt on. Maybe they need an interim because they're, I don't know, covering something or whatever. But I will be responsible for learning and development. And a big part of that is compliance training. So even though that might sit in other areas, like, for instance, cybersecurity will sit with the tech team or the IT team, and health and safety will sit with health and safety team or whatever, operations. We are the people who are kind of responsible for the training on it. And one thing when it comes to stuff like that is like, have you actually trained the person to do it? So that's a big one on bribery. Like, everyone obviously needs to be trained on
ABC.
Yeah, like the UK Bribery Act or whatever it is. And we have to do the training. We have to make sure that they do the online training, that we have a policy in place that reasonably, if someone was to offer you a bribe or you was to be involved in that, you would actually recognize that it is that. So that's another thing that I would think about. Like, is this person who has had this failing, have we helped them to be able to do the job? Because if you put someone in a position and you haven't given them the training, or they're not at the level where they should just kind of know it from their experience, then it probably wouldn't be their fault. Like, if someone accepted a bribe and you're in a company where no one gave you anti-bribery training, even if you're senior, if they tried to fire you, you would take them to tribunal and say, actually, it's unfair because you fired me for something that actually wasn't my failing, it's a company failing.
Amazing. I've got so many questions. I'm gonna try to do this in a succinct chronological order and work back from kind of your most recent response, because that was one of my questions around kind of how HR interacts with compliance processes and vice versa. So, working with all the different organizations you've worked with, how varied is it then when it comes to being involved in things that are requirements of things that are a requirement of compliance, but are also a crossover HR? You mentioned training, for example. Whilst it's important to ensure that anti-bribery corruption training is undertaken, which is usually a compliance requirement, when does HR get involved or step in, and how does it vary across different organizations or different firms?
Yeah, it depends on, a lot of time depends on the size of the company. Okay. When you work in a big company, like I used to work as a Deloitte, or I've worked at other large companies, they will usually have a team that does that. Like, for instance, if you work at a law firm or you work at a consulting firm, they have a whole team which is just does KYC. Know your client checks, do their conflict check, establish the source of funds, all of that stuff. Make sure you're not working for a competitor or whatever. Whereas when you work in a smaller company, that kind of stuff is, I don't want to say people do it side of desk, but people wear more hats. So it just depends on usually the size of the company. So for instance, me in my roles, because I usually work with smaller companies, I will usually end up doing the compliance training, and I will write the policies. Usually we get a template or we get an external company to help us, but I would be the one responsible for collating or liaising with the lawyers or the specialists that create the policies. Or if it's kind of policy where it's pretty standard, we just get one off one of the one of the suppliers that we use, and we'll just
template and just kind of
template it and take it forward. But it really just depends. In the companies that I work for, because they're much smaller, I do a lot of the stuff. Like I won't mention it because I don't know how you guys do your sponsorship, but there's a particular like learning management system. I have put it into 3 or 4 different companies where I get there, they don't have one, you need compliance training, roll this out, blah 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 blah, and then just roll out the training. Do you know what I mean? Whereas in a bigger company, there's probably a lot more that you have to do. Whereas in a smaller company, it's like, we just need to get compliant and actually let's look at what the training says we have to do and let's build that into our processes. Whereas in a bigger company, you would think you might have a really established process that you've spent time and worked with the business, and then you write a policy and training around the process. Whereas we would get the training and make sure the process matches the training, which we know is compliant. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And it's,
can I just ask a question though? I want to interrupt you for a change. But isn't that opening up a huge amount of risk? If you've got a HR department writing compliance policies, is that not going to come back and bite both HR and compliance on the arse later on?
It depends on what the policy is. So for instance, a bribery policy in a company that is unlikely to have a politically exposed person or doesn't do anything that is particularly exciting is actually quite easy. Like there's especially when
risk,
it's quite low risk. Like you work in as a HR person, we usually have a subscription to a particular service. I won't name them, different ones, where you can get policies, and those policies they have a legal team which updates the policies. They make sure that they change them for, like, if there's something new that comes into the law, you can check when it was last updated, and they take responsibility for maintaining those. And then if there's a change in the law, they'll notify you and say, hey, we've made these changes to the policy, and it's actually better, especially when you're a small company, you don't have a compliance team, it's actually better to kind of outsource that and go with a company which is responsible for updating the policies, because then they can do it once and they can send it to 100 customers and say these are the changes. So it's not like we just kind of pull it off like somebody's website and then just change the name. It's like we use companies which literally design these policies. But again, of course, like if it was like a financial services company or I don't know, different types of company. Like I do a lot of work with fintech, and they're obviously, because even if they're not necessarily regulated, because they work with regulated customers, they are much more like much tighter, and at an earlier stage they'll have a lot of those policies, or they'll go out and get the external advice. Whereas if I'm working with a creative agency, it's much lower risk, and actually maybe then we can use one of the templated policies. Or like modern slavery is a good example. If you work at a recruitment company, I used to be head of people for a recruitment company. There's a lot of things that you need to do for modern slavery, because it's very possible that if you're an agency and you have temporary staff, have you done all your identity checks, right to work? There's usually a few people in the chain before they get to the ultimate supplier. There's a larger modern slavery risk there. Whereas if you work again in a tech company that's 100% UK based, and there's 30 of you that all work in one office, the modern slavery risk is low. So it just depends on, you have to also understand the risk appetite for the business, and understand what is low risk, what is high risk, and understand where you are particularly exposed, and make sure you invest more in those areas, because you can't invest in all the areas because you don't have the capacity or the resource.
So who oversees so I understand outsourcing the creation of the policies, but in that situation there, who would oversee the adherence to that policy?
Oh, that will be usually around different parts of the business. So for instance, even if I wouldn't probably write a data protection policy, but if it was data protection, let's say we were responsible for doing the training, making sure everyone has the training, making sure the policy has been updated, maybe not by us, but by someone within the last 12 months. that will be probably more likely to sit with the CTO and his team. So I don't know, the head of IT infrastructure, I don't know, whoever does that. Or if it is something like health and safety policy, we might be the ones who put it on the platform and make sure employees can access it. But there'll be somebody in the company who is responsible for like actually adhering to it, like making sure we have the accident book or the accident log, or people that have, was it IOSH, NEBOSH, or whatever those things are. I don't know what they are, but people that have those qualifications. Or we might send the people on the first aid training, but there'll be somebody who makes sure that there's somebody on every floor or someone in every day that has, so it might be the operations person, which makes sure somebody is in every day who's a fire warden, who's first aid trained, or someone does the fire risk assessment, or all of those sorts of things. So we work with the business and different people, whoever is kind of most qualified or best placed to do that work will be the person to do it. So it's not like we'll do everything, because we don't have the time or the capacity, but most of the time it's about coordination. And actually, because of how we work, HR are very good at compliance, because in the way we work, we have to comply with certain things. So it kind of HR, IT, legal, those are the places where you typically find people that understand the need to be compliant without having to be convinced.
Who identifies the SMEs then in those kind of organizations that you go into? So the subject expert matter experts, where you are doing designing kind of policy, who then goes and says, actually, okay, that person will be the SME and will be ensuring, like Alex said, adherence to these policies or these procedures that are being created?
Usually it's literally like, it wouldn't be me. I might know who the person is because it's obvious. So if it was like a cybersecurity policy, I'm going to know I need to go and talk to the tech team, or I need to go and talk to IT. But if it's not immediately clear to me, then I'll have to, find out. Or maybe at the exec meeting, I'll be like, hey, we've done this audit. And also you can use consultants, and they might come in on a one-off basis and say, these are the things that you're missing, but they don't necessarily stay at your company forever. But usually, literally, we get around it's smaller organizations. I'm talking anything up to like 100 people, 150, 200. You can, the core people, or the kind of C-suite, the heads of, there is always a chance to sit around the table, whether it's at a monthly management meeting, senior management meeting, exec meeting, board meeting. There will always be an opportunity to sit around and be like, okay, we need to hash these things out. Who is the most appropriate person? And then the CTO will be like, I think this person in my team will take it. CFO will be like, I think that one's for us. Okay, anti-bribery corruption, I'll take that one. Like, and we just divvy it out. And then those people are obviously given the responsibility, the training if they need it. Hopefully they have the competence. And if they don't, we'd hope that they'd be like, hey, this is not my,
it's like
my wheelhouse.
All the stakeholders kind of feed into the decision making.
Yeah.
Okay. And going back again to the other question I had, unless you've got another pressing question, you mentioned obviously when you was in accounting and as a tax advisor, you had the big red rule book and regulation legislation, which is quite funny because that is kind of the perception which is lasting of compliance, which hopefully through this podcast we are trying to dispel. But then in terms of HR now, because like I said, it's so varied, even as you mentioned, like different organizations do HR in a different way. What are then the core rules and kind of regulatory or frameworks of rules or regulation that all HR has to comply or adhere to? There must be, like obviously you mentioned employment law. What are the main
I'm a
things?
HR generalist, so I do all types of HR. But when you think about HR, these are some of the areas of HR, and some of them won't have to do much. So you have learning and development, so training basically. So there are specific regulations where people are allowed to request training. For instance, that's actually written in law that twice a year you can request training or whatever. Most companies don't care about that because they let you request training whenever you want. Then you can be in employee relations, and that is where you really need to know the law. That's like what we call like sort of all the bad stuff, redundancies, grievances, dismissal, and a lot of that is governed by there's various employment law, but like Employment Rights Act is the main one. The other one that everyone should know is the Equality Act 2010, and that's the one that basically has the 9 protected characteristics, and you can't discriminate against anybody on any of like, I don't know, race, gender, disability, marital status, if someone's
sexual orientation,
sexual identity, religion. I can't remember.
Yeah.
There's 9 of them, right? And you can't discriminate against anybody on those bases. And that's the one that trips people up a lot. That's the one that lands employers in tribunal. And all of the, like right now, since Labour came in, you know, they have said that they're going to do a new employment rights bill. So they've started to talk about what that's going to be. And the employment rights bill will change fundamentally some of the big things that we kind of know about HR. So one of the key things in HR, and that anybody should know actually that works in the UK, is you have a limited number of rights until you have 2 years of service, right? So one of the main rights that you have is when you reach 2 years of service as an employee is that you can claim unfair dismissal. So if your employer is to fire you for no reason, they're not supposed to do that. It doesn't matter how long you've been in service, they shouldn't do that. But if they do it when you've had less than 2 years service, it's still wrong, but you can't sue them. Sorry, you can't sue them. So
Interesting.
well, there's nothing you can do about it. The only time you can do something if you have less than 2 years service is if it's related to discrimination. So if they said, hey, we don't want women here anymore, no more blacks, yeah, or you have a wheelchair and actually we don't want to add a ramp, so we're just going to fire you, or something like that. And then obviously it's not usually that overt, but all of that sort of stuff, then it doesn't matter how long you've been there,
you can still
and different things are even under disability. Disability is covered under the Equality Act, but it doesn't have to be like a physical disability. Obviously, it's a long-term condition that affects your quality of life or affects you on a daily basis. So it could be if you have depression, and let's say you can't come to work on certain days, and you have high sickness, and they fire you for your high sickness, but actually you have a disability under the Act, so they should have probably made some allowances for you. So those are probably the main ones. And then there's loads of other things that kind of bolt onto the Employment Rights Act, like stuff to do with maternity discrimination, or GDPR obviously is very important for us. Anything data protection, because obviously we carry very sensitive data, have a lot of personal data, but also HR will have stuff about like sickness, your like medical information, biometrics and stuff like that. So we have to be able to deal with that. The thing people care most about is like pay data, but we have all your data. Do you know what I mean? We know where you live, we know how much you get paid, we've got your bank details, we literally have like we know your next of kin, we have copies of your ID, we've got your background check, so we know if you've got CCJs. Do you know what I mean? We know everything about you, and we have to keep that information on file, and we have to make sure that we explain to you how we process that data, and we also need to make sure that we stop using that data and we delete that data, destroy that data once we no longer need it. And obviously, because we do payroll and we have HMRC can do an audit, like I think up to 6 years after you can get fined after 6 years of taxes or whatever it is. So we need to keep that information for 7 years basically after you leave. Not all of it, but some of it, because if HMRC come and ask us for the information, we need to be able to provide and have good record keeping. There's there's a couple of different schools of thoughts when it comes to references, because we need to know who you are, so that if someone asks us, did Ray work here, we can say yeah, but how long do you need that for? Do you know what I mean? If you come, does that give us the right to keep your information indefinitely in case you need a reference? Now a lot of companies will say after 7 years you can't get a reference from us anymore because we deleted your data, and we can't, and they'll write back and they'll say, sorry, we can't give a reference because our policy is only to hold employee data for this long after the person leaves, and we don't have a record of that person, which probably is not very helpful if you need a reference.
Have you found the HR policies, the HR rules, legislation easier or harder to comply with since remote working's increased?
I don't know if there's really any difference. The application, I guess, COVID is in general, it was probably a bigger issue than the specifics of remote working. Like, what's just harder in HR since COVID is, number one, getting people to come to the office, and getting people to come to the office, even when they're supposed to come to the office. And also just, some of it's good and some of it's bad, right? Some of it's like, employees have more autonomy, and you can use that autonomy to, feel empowered and say, actually, I want to speak up more, or actually, do I need to be in this meeting? Do I need to be in this location? If you have sense, and like, if you listen to the Everybody Hates HR podcast, you'll know that we speak very like candidly. Some people are very balanced and together. Some people are not. Some people are, employees are just people, which means that you get ones that are really smart and you get ones that really lack self-awareness. So that's been quite difficult to control. And I think contracts are a big part of it. So what happened a lot with COVID is that most people before COVID had an employment contract which said you come to the office every day.
Yeah.
Your main place of work is this place. Then COVID came along and we said everyone go work remotely, but most companies didn't put any paperwork around it. And documentation is so important in HR because every time you make a change, you're supposed to do a letter to vary the contract, because what the employment contract is what governs the relationship. So most companies didn't say, oh, here's a new letter saying that you now only have to come into the office 3 days a week. And so they started saying people actually come back 5 days, and everyone's like, but I've been working at home for like 3 days. You can't do that. Custom and practice, or it's a bit of a minefield. So I think that's been really hard because it feels like such a small thing, but it's actually quite a big thing. Trying to get people to come to the office, trying to get people to adjust their ways of working when they've gotten used to different ways of working. The working environment has become much more casual, I think. Like, even like I was saying, I was working at Deloitte, we used to have just done Fridays, and then they started having, like, I know since I've left, they have dress for your day. So if you don't have client meetings, you can dress as you want to dress. And even stuff like that, like trying to make people act in the way you want them to act since COVID has just been very difficult. And I think what COVID did, which is good, was get people to like know their rights more, feel like they should be more invested in their rights. That's actually how I met my co-host during COVID. Because of all the furlough and all this stuff that no one really understood, there was a lot of really bad advice going around, and I was creating HR content online, she was creating HR content online, and we just like connected that way. And we met on Twitter, and it's been like, when we found out we have mutual friends and all this other X, we met on X, which I'm no longer on because anyway, different subjects,
different episode.
Then we speak about Elon Musk. But yeah, that's how we met. And when it came to like COVID, and people just wanted to know their rights more. But stuff is not easy. Like, we take time to learn these things. So sometimes what I found from after COVID is people are a lot more like, this is my right, but sometimes it's not your right. So people want to be more empowered and understand their rights and understand employment law and all of this stuff, but sometimes they don't necessarily have the nuance. So sometimes, like, we end up in disputes with employees when they're actually just wrong, but they don't know they're wrong, and they're like wrong and strong with it. And I find that to be quite a challenge, because you want to be empathetic and you want to obviously treat people with respect and hear people out. But when you're actually an expert and someone is telling you something that's obviously wrong, but they're fighting for it, it's quite difficult. So I find that to be a real big challenge. And it happens, like, most HR professionals will tell you that someone will be like, I've read on Citizens Advice that you have to do this, and we don't.
Yeah. So in terms of like your background and working in a more, I guess, highly regulated space prior to in HR, do you think that shaped the way you think about HR? And second question, do you think you've had to unlearn any behaviors around application of regulation and policy? Specifically, what you mentioned just now was around kind of being empathetic. Do you think you've had to unlearn any behaviors or learn new behaviors to be able to be more successful in your role?
I think it's a really good foundation for me. And for my career, it was great. It's great to have the accounting qualifications, because even though I don't use them for accounting, they do two really good things for me. One, most of my clients are like, I report to the CFO, and CFO will be like, oh, you have an accounting qualification. They just assume I'm really smart and that I know stuff. So that's really great for me personally. But also, when you do stuff like ACCA or any accounting qualification, there's a big focus on governance. So that whole idea of, like, you have to do a module on, like, ethics, governance, blah, blah, blah. And that is a great foundation for HR, because it explains, like, consequences. And there's this concept in accounting called professional skepticism. And that's like, you actually need to validate things. You need, like, audit. You need to, like, someone tells you something's there. How do you know it's there? They tell you they have a machine that they spent £200,000 on. You need to physically go and check that the machine is there. Like, the whole idea of having professional skepticism, and that you need to validate things and verify things and check things once, twice, 3 times. That's great for HR, because you need to be like, have great attention to detail a lot of the time, and you need to make sure that you have followed what the law has told you to do. So that, I think, has been a good foundation there. And just in terms of, like, working in consulting, working in that sort of environment, even if you don't become a HR consultant, a lot of people that work in HR, they are internal consultants. We have to advise, like, that's a big part of it. The bulk of the work we do is supporting line managers, not employees. We support employees, but really through their line managers. Like, most of the time we tell employees, if you have a question, go to your manager. And if managers don't know how to answer it, they come to us, because
Yeah.
there's a finite number of us, but everyone has a manager, so it's easy to disseminate the kind of responsibility that way. And we work with line managers to make sure that they do the right thing. We coach them, we answer their questions, we do all of those sorts of things. And so we act as the internal consultant. They come and say, oh, I've got someone in my team who really wants to be promoted, but maybe they're not ready. What can we do? We really like them, but they really want to take this promotion. They're just not ready for it. I might say to them, okay, you really value them. Why don't you tell them that you value them? You give them a path to promotion in the next 12 months if they do X, Y, and Z. What training do they need to help them to get to the 12, to get them to where you want them to get in 12 months? What kind of opportunities, what projects you need to put them on? Why don't you think about that? Who can we pair them on? Can we give them a sponsor in the business? Like that sort of thing is what we would do. So you have to do a lot of advisory, or I've got someone in my team who calls in sick every Friday, and we're not
But that
sure.
sounds, so to cut you off, because that is amazing, and it sounds like a very proactive, forward-thinking way of doing HR. But again, from my experience across almost 20 years of working, not every HR is like that. No, HRs work very differently. So
That's the same for compliance.
Yeah, but then my question is there like a standard? Are there requirements or rules around investment or
No.
training for HR that
No.
they must ensure a business applies certain
So
minimum standards
the main
around?
professional body, our professional body is CIPD. That's the Chartered Institute
Okay.
of Personnel and Development, right? And that they govern, in theory, what we do. You don't have to be a member to work in HR, but they're the ones that do our qualifications. So if you want to work at a certain level, you get CIPD level 3, level 5, or level 7, and they give us good framework. And the main framework that we work within is the kind of ACAS guides. So there's an organization called ACAS, and they're the ones that govern, like they have an ACAS guide on how to handle disciplinaries, grievances, redundancies. And that's the thing that you really should follow, and your policy should align with that, because if your policies don't align with that and you don't follow that, when you go to tribunal, you will lose.
But you guys you are talking like you're different people, but HR personnel, you're human, so you can make mistakes as well. You can get things
100%.
wrong. From your experience, what's the most common HR mistake that you've seen that turns into a compliance issue? Guys, thank you for listening to Compliance Chronicles. It means the world to us. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends and colleagues.
A lot of stuff around diversity, equality, inclusion, stuff like that. Because sometimes people think that, as you said, we're just people. So you don't walk into work and become a different person. Yeah. If you're the kind of like the values you have, there's a way to do things, but sometimes the values you have, we all have our own inherent biases, which mean that when we go, like, for instance, an employee complains and says, people keep making fun of my accent. Yeah. You can say, there's different ways of dealing with it. Someone might say, oh, I'm really sorry about that. Like, we're going to speak to such and such, and, we're going to have a strong word with them, advise them, obviously tell people not to do that or whatever, and then deal with it from there. Or another person could say, it's just banter. Like, just get over it. Like, it's not that deep.
Yeah.
It depends. And actually this class as discrimination. So that's probably it's all those kind of things where people don't take things as seriously as they should, whether it's to do with race, gender, disability, things like people just think, oh, it's not that bad. Employee says, oh, I have mobility issues, and can you put a ramp outside the building for me so that I can actually get in? And they're like, you're getting in fine now. Like, don't make a fuss. Like, if you need help, just ask somebody. That's actually not good for them. Like, they need dignity. They don't want to be asking someone to help them into the building when they're having a hard time. Like, stuff like that, then that's discrimination. But that's where I think HR can come really unstuck sometimes, because they just don't deal with it properly. Because again, it's one of those things that you said before, some stuff is open to interpretation. They don't say this act is discrimination, that act is discrimination, that act is discrimination. They basically say you shouldn't discriminate against someone on any of these bases. But what I consider to be discrimination, what you consider discrimination, and what a judge might consider to be discrimination is open. And that's why so many discrimination cases go to tribunal, because there is an element of judgment in it. Like, what was the intent? What was the outcome? Should this person have known better? Why did this person do that? This is like a topic that I can probably geek out to, but like, there's so many cases where like things have happened where, for instance, there was one with a policeman. And his manager one day just decided that he was going to look for his old cases and start critiquing the cases that he did 5 years ago. And he was like, why is he doing that?
Yeah.
And then when he said, oh, I want to talk to you about this case from 5 years ago. And obviously he was like, why are you doing that? And then the manager basically had said to him, you're staring at me menacingly. It was a black man. That you're staring at me menacingly. And he was like, why are you saying that? I'm just looking at you with confusion.
Yeah.
And actually that went to tribunal, and the black police officer won, because it was deemed that actually a big part of it was that you was feeding into the angry black man stereotype. Whereas he, number one, he might not have even taken it any further if he could have just let it go. And another person or one HR person might have not thought that was a big deal, or even one judge might not have thought that was a big deal. But actually in this particular case, it was held to be discrimination. There's a load of cases like that, and cases where the HR team, they didn't deal with things properly, or the manager didn't deal with things properly because they didn't think it would be considered to be discrimination.
So then on the flip side to that, what are the common compliance mistakes that turn into HR issues?
Compliance mistakes. Generally people doing things which they're not supposed to do within the policy. So for instance, I've worked in organizations where employees have been caught by phishing scams. I worked in one where a phishing scam, they ended up sending someone in finance sent £200,000 to a fraudster.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now you're in trouble, you know. But then, did we do the right training? Did we teach people about phishing scams and stuff like that? So those are the kind of things where you've actually, there's something that you're not supposed to do that you've done, or it's mainly that sort of thing. Like, again, that is equality, diversity, inclusion is also part of compliance. So where that hasn't been done properly could end up being a HR thing. Even things like, you know, every time you go to a team social, it's at the pub. Now all of our Muslim colleagues can't come.
Funny you say that, because we had the guest on there. We discussed equality and diversity and compliance, and then we have other colleagues as well who, you know, are from different faiths, and then we discussed kind of various different kind of events and conferences and stuff in the industries that we work in, especially in the gambling sector, where a lot of the social aspects around drinking or around frequenting bars and stuff like that. And so I think that's another aspect, I guess that is something that as an industry, in terms of compliance from an equality and diversity perspective, is sometimes overlooked and overshadowed. But when it comes to kind of compliance in general, just a general sense, obviously it looks like you've got, no, doesn't look like, you have got a really good foundation in terms of your background. What does compliance look to you? Like, what does compliance mean to you, should I say? What does compliance mean to you, one? And do you feel that compliance means something very different to you because of your backstory in your working history compared to another HR director?
Yeah. I don't know if it means something different to me now, because my frame of reference is very much like very HR now. But compliance for me, if I'm being honest, it means we don't get sued. That's the main thing, to be honest. Like, that's the Billy basics. Obviously, on top of that, you build people feeling, you know, having job satisfaction, feeling valued at work, feeling fulfilled at what they do. Your company having high performance, but you have enabled as a people person or a HR person. But the fundamentals, we don't want to get sued. Like, that's what it is. Don't want to get sued. Don't want to fall foul of anything. Don't want to get, and not even just sued by employees. Don't want to get in any trouble with any sort of regulator. We don't want to have a employee submit a DSAR that we don't respond to, and then now they're threatening to go to the ICO, even though the ICO never does anything.
On that note, what does HR mean to you? Because they're tarnished with the same brush in most companies.
Yeah, and that's why I think HR and compliance have a shared or common goal, common aim, which is not what most people think is stopping things happening. I think HR and compliance are there to ensure that the right things happen. So I think that HR, what it means to me, is ensuring that the right things happen within the organization when it comes to equality, diversity, when it comes to...
Do you know why this is funny? I've got to say
data protection and things that are aligned to humans in the business, providing an environment for each individual to flourish.
Yeah,
that's what I think HR is.
You had that. Ray has this thing, right? He has these great quotes, And we were talking about this earlier. Like Ray was giving me like things that he was saying. He's like, "Oh, I want to mention this," and I was like, "Write that down. Like, write that down,"
Yeah.
because he says stuff, and we're calling it like Wilson's words of wisdom or something like that. And that was one of them. He'd said something similar earlier. I was like, "That's so good. You got to remember to say
Yeah,
that."
I don't think it came out as I said it the first time around.
Yeah, it was much better the first time. But yeah, Wilson's words of wisdom.
I wanted to touch on something actually, because I think I didn't answer it probably the first time. But you were saying that is every HR like what I described?
Yeah.
But no, obviously not. Like there are some. The way you approach HR is very much to do with the culture of your company and what they want to achieve. Some HR are very personnel, like it's tick box. You got a contract, tick. You have done this, tick. Flexible working request, tick. Not doing anything more than the absolute minimum that they need to do with the law. So the law says every employee has to have a statement of terms and conditions when they go to work, when they start working. So they'll make sure that they have, and it has to include as a minimum these things. They'll produce a contract which has as a minimum those things. They'll have only the policies which you have to have by law. They will do just the bare minimum that you need to do legally, and that is like a HR team, which people would probably say is like more like compliance, even though I know that's not what you guys actually do. But that's the stereotypical view of like personnel. They're just there to like, do the bare minimum. And the reason the podcast is called Everybody Hates HR is because like that is the perception of HR, right? And we are always fighting for our lives on TikTok. Like whenever we make a video, oh, HR only there to protect the company. You only do what's best for the company. And we're like, well, yeah, but ideally what's in the best interest of the company is also in the best interest of the individual. And how HR in the organization behave is very much by the culture. If you have a culture which is like, we really want to nurture our team, we want to do this, we want to do that, we're there for career growth, then that's how HR in your company will behave. It won't just be purely compliance or purely like what people want to think is box ticking. But if you have a company which is like, people are resources. Yeah. And we treat them like resources.
Yeah.
We pay them because we have to. They don't get one penny more. They have to do their hours, no flexibility or whatever. Then that's how that's how HR will probably behave as well.
You mentioned culture a few times there. So in compliance, we always, or it's not so common now, but there was a common phrase of tone from the top. And the HR always talk about culture. Are they the same thing?
It's very similar, yeah. It is, I mean, the culture usually is set at the top. So for instance, if you telling people that you want them to come to the office all the time, but the CEO doesn't want to come to the office, it's hard, right? Or if you're saying to people, we really care about, investing in your development, but actually the management doesn't actually allow you any time to go on courses or do any training or anything like that. That is part of that will help to form the culture. And a lot of the time it does come from the top. You can have kind of pockets of subculture in like certain teams and stuff like that, but it is basically like the tone from the top and what the business like portrays and what the what the business's actions tell you about the business, right? So you can say all these wonderful things, but the culture is really how we do things around here. Like what do we do, and does it align with what we say? But it's really about the culture and the norms, and it's about the values of the business and how those show up in your kind of everyday working life.
I think there's many commonalities in between HR and between compliance. Not only that, I think when HR and compliance interact together well, it drives business performance. Have you seen any, or have you worked with any organizations that have interacted well in compliance and then seeing that come into fruition in terms of driving actual business performance? And if so, kind of what does that look like? Like the compliance department is proactive in kind of being a business a driving agent, and then HR alongside that trying to drive that bus with them. And what does it look like?
I don't know if this is a good example, and I don't really know if it's like necessarily if it comes from compliance. Maybe remember most of the businesses I work in, we don't even have compliance function. But the desire to be compliant and the compliance work, for instance, one of the things that I don't know why I always have to get involved in is SOC 2. Like whenever the companies I work for, when they want to go for their SOC 2 certification, SOC 2, there's a big people element to it. Like
what's a SOC 2 certification?
It's just a compliance standard or some sort of standard which a lot of the companies, mainly the fintechs I work with, like they get the certification and it says that they have like good processes or something. I don't know. I'm asking
like an ISO.
like an ISO, but I think I don't want to offend any SOC people, but I feel like when I've seen ISO, it feels a lot more serious. But it gets
ISO specifically technical standards. SOC 2. That's a good
it
question.
doesn't feel as technical, but I
Yeah.
think it's more about like processes. For instance, one of the things in SOC 2 is like, do your employees regularly get appraisals? And then when we do the audit, they'll be like, they'll give us a random bunch of employees and say, show us their appraisals from the last year. So we have to get involved in that. And one of the things is that if you are a company, you don't have that and you want to get it, and you're not currently doing appraisals for your team every year, you will start to do appraisals, because the companies like that you work with, they want to see that you have.
Because so SOC 2 is specifically around people. But
No, they're just one element of it
okay.
that is it looks at process across the whole business.
Okay.
But one element of it is about people. So for instance, if you get your SOC 2, then you can say, oh, like, we are developing our people to a certain standard. But it's just it's a tiny element of it. But if you're a company that you want to get SOC 2, you need to make sure you're doing that, because if you don't have like certain policies in place, and if you're not looking after your employees by giving them appraisals and stuff, you're not going to get the certification.
Also, having the certification is basically a good way of making HR more compliant, essentially.
It is like it indirectly. So it's like ISO, right? When you get ISO, so that you can say to other companies, hey, we have ISO, we're ISO compliant, we're certified, so I guess we're good.
Yeah, it's like ESG. Everyone wants to get ESG certification.
Yeah, exactly.
So then they started investing more in
exactly. Like, I don't know if anyone was checking all their carbon emissions and stuff before anybody started checking. Do you know what I mean? So it's like that. So sometimes, because companies want to level up and a lot of these different certifications are asking for these different things, it can indirectly kind of drive them to do things in HR which they wouldn't, or they haven't done before. So I've done a couple of projects where specifically what they're trying to get SOC 2 certification. Usually I've done it at like 3 different fintechs. They're trying to get SOC 2 certification, and actually they haven't got the stuff that they need for people, and so they've hired me or my company to come in and start putting those processes in place, making sure, for instance, that people's probate, like, there's something in there like, do people get a confirmation once they pass, do you manage people's probations and stuff like that? So there were companies that weren't doing it before, but they're doing it now because they needed to get the SOC 2 certification, so that certain companies will work with them. So that's, I guess, an example. I only learned what ISOs were like this year.
Yeah, and I have great knowledge or no knowledge of SOC 2, so I'll be researching that after this episode. Or so anybody who is listening to this episode who has a deep knowledge of what SOC 2 is more than welcome to.
And also, I've probably really butchered it, because I only really know my part of it. But I was telling you guys, I've recently, for one of my clients, been recruiting a compliance manager.
You did.
And that's the only reason I know any of this stuff. So one of my clients has a new AI product, and they're going for ISO 42001. So I know that. I know ISO 9001.
I feel like we should be embarrassed that it's a compliance certification. I've got no idea what SOC 2 is. Honestly, I'm embarrassed right now that someone's going to listen to this and go, these guys are doing
I'm going to Google it. Because, I probably said it's probably not compliance, but it's compliance for me.
One of the good things about being a good compliance leader is not having all the answers, but knowing the right questions to ask. So
the right question to ask is, what the hell is SOC 2?
What the hell is SOC 2?
Okay, hold on. Is a framework SOC 2 is a framework established by the AICPA to assess. Oh yes, I did know this. To assess and report on controls. It's like to show that you have good internal controls.
Okay.
Relevant to security. Something, and privacy of an organization's systems. Yeah.
I'm not even going to act like I'm really familiar with
I'm going to research it.
Yeah.
What we'll do is we'll edit this whole part out of the episode and then we'll redo it and be like, oh, so you should know there's a SOC 2.
SOC 2, yeah. It's a thing.
Yeah, SOC 2.
I'm conscious of time.
Yeah.
Do you have any pertinent questions? Because I want to do a quick fire.
So yeah, what I wanted to discuss was actually a couple of case studies, like a couple of high profile case studies. One of them was the post office Horizon scandal, which the whole world should probably know about, which was from 1990.
Is that Mr. Bates versus the post office?
Yeah. So over 700 postmasters were prosecuted, some even imprisoned for being accused of falsifying accounts and stuff,
stealing money
when actually it was the actual systems in place that were having errors. And then we had the case last month, which was Barclay being fined 42 million for a massive anti-money and financial crime failings.
Which month? Just for people that might listen to this.
July
2025.
July 2025. And some of the identified failings included police warning Barclays about clients, You know, what else was there? There was
There was something to do with whistleblowing.
yeah, no. So that's what I was asking around HR. So there were police raids on some of the clients and other things like risk profiles being super inconsistent, but Barclays didn't offboard the clients. Many of them were just kept on board. So my question was there opportunity? Would a better HR in both those organizations would a better HR in any of those organizations been able to potentially avoid those happening in terms of the post office scandal or Barclays, for example, a whistleblowing policy or escalation policy or a clear review policy or a procedure in terms of when we decide somebody has done something fraudulently or not.
Yeah.
Do you think a better HR would have been able to stop those compliance failings?
I don't know if better HR would have helped, because I'm thinking at what point would it have come across HR's desk? Thinking about the post office one, I definitely think probably because obviously the postmasters were like kind of self-employed, but not really self-employed. But I do think regardless of whatever their employment status or whatever was, they should have had a HR, a pseudo HR, a type of HR which looked after them. And I can't imagine any sort of and they did do investigations, but I can't imagine putting a quote unquote employee in prison or doing all of this stuff without doing a really thorough investigation.
Yeah, so
a forensic
exactly.
investigation. Like, so that's what I think maybe, but again, it's about the culture and it depends where HR reports into, because if I mean we work for somebody. Do you know what I mean? So if someone says don't look at that, or this is what we're going to do, to an extent some of it is just taking direction. I think what probably would have been more important is the culture of people understanding or believing if I do something wrong or if I do something fraudulent, and I'm not talking about the postmaster, I'm talking about the people that, because there were obviously people in the business who knew that it wasn't just a one-off or a two-off or whatever. It was happening a lot, and they kept telling the individuals, oh, it's just you, we think it's you, and they stopped them from being able to speak. And I think if people in the business really believe that if I do something bad and I get caught, it's curtains for me, I feel like that might have been different. Like if they believe that the company will appreciate me more if I report this than if I stay silent.
Yeah.
So I think that's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
I think it's about like your code of conduct and the culture of the company. And that's what I mean, because you can write whatever you want down, but if you work in a company where you feel like, actually, it's better that I don't speak now.
Yeah.
Like, do you have a culture where people are supposed to speak up, where reporting things will be welcomed, or will it be like, shh, and go over there? Like, you're making more problems for us than you're bringing solutions. I think that probably would have been like, that's probably the more important thing. So it's more about culture and understanding that it kind of is a zero tolerance, and what do you reward and what do you kind of sanction, I think is important. With I think it's probably the same with Barclays, because you have to think about what motivates people, like what incentivizes them, because it's the same thing that happened with all the subprime mortgages before. People are incentivized by the wrong things. If taking it all the way back to Enron, like people are you thinking in a long-term way? Like, what are you trying to get? Like, are you just more interested in making sure that you have all the customers on, that you can use their money so that you can have them as customers, or actually what has your company taught you is at the top? You know, like, is it more important to have the money and to have the customers, or is it more important to stay compliant? Because people will generally do what you tell them to do. So when it comes to something like Barclays, I'm not thinking it's those individuals. I'm thinking that is a culture. Like, these people have been taught and told, probably not with words, directly or indirectly, that is this is what you should prioritize. We prioritize having these customers. We prioritize making sure we can keep this revenue. This is what we're going to prioritize. Because I really believe that people don't do. You might get individuals, but en masse, employees don't do what you don't allow them or what you don't tell them to do. So if everyone's thinking this is okay to do, or there's multiple people in the chain who have allowed this failure to happen or who have overlooked this, it's because the culture has allowed them to do so.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, and I think you're right. I think compliance is there to protect the rules and the ethics of business practice, and HR is there to protect the people. But when there's a prohibition or inhibition with one or the other, then it almost fundamentally falls down. So like, we've got the rules and ethics through compliance, but the people weren't protected because obviously in Enron, in Barclays or in the post office case more 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 candidly, like those people weren't protected, even though the rules were there.
And that's why, like, when I worked, when I was a tax advisor, I did compensation and benefits. That was my specialty. And one of the things which a lot of companies, that, you know, big companies, they have like remuneration committees and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's that part of the reason that they do all these long-term incentive plans now is to encourage leaders to make good decisions for the
Yeah.
long term. Because before, when it was like your annual bonus, you can be incentivized to do whatever you need to inflate profits for this year without thinking about the consequences in the future, right? Whereas if you have a long-term incentive plan, it encourages people to think, okay, if I do the right thing now, if I do the right thing, that's going to enable us to be successful this year, the next year, I'll do even better. And that's what I mean about creating a culture where you're telling them, think about long term, versus like just think about now, being very like self-interested for the period of now.
Yeah. I think there's examples show that when compliance and HR don't talk or don't talk well, the people in the business pay the price. And I think, like I said, that's why I wanted to ask that question, because I personally feel like if there was a better HR or better HR communication with compliance on both scenarios, it might have avoided
better processes.
Maybe it's not HR compliance. Maybe it all comes down to governance.
And that's another part.
HR is a part of governance. Yeah, exactly.
So,
look at that, full circle.
God, you had. Sorry, I'm conscious of the time.
Yeah, no, conscious of time. So try and wrap it up. But I wanted to do some. I wrote down some quick fire questions for you.
Shoot.
You ready? I've only done a couple of them to make it easier. HR or compliance? Who's scarier?
HR.
Yeah, I agree.
We know all the secrets. You're even part of it.
That's true. That's true.
One HR policy that everyone should scrap.
That's hard. I think learning policies, because I think they're actually quite restrictive. When you have a learning policy, like learning is usually more flexible. You can request training on this day, or you can have up to this amount. I think it sometimes can be a bit restrictive.
And the last one compliance policy that nobody reads but they should.
The disciplinary policy.
Yeah.
100%, because people will do something and then they'll be like, oh, but that's not, I'm allowed to do that. So, no, you're not.
Yeah.
That's not gross misconduct.
Yes. Even the, like you're saying, the anti-bribery corruption, and then you have the hospitality element within kind of the bribery and corruption, that what you can accept as hospitality and gifts. Often people just overlook that and they'll go accepting things from clients.
Yeah, they'd be like, did you put it on the gifts register? What's a gifts register?
Yeah. I normally wrap with 2 final questions for all of our guests. So we'll do that quickly because of the time.
Yeah, we're going to get kicked out.
Yeah, we're going to get kicked out. So the first question I always ask is, tell me about a recent challenge or something recent that hasn't gone to plan.
Related to compliance?
No, just in general. It can be in your personal life. It can be in work. Something that hasn't gone wrong.
You've been traveling recently.
Something that hasn't gone well.
Have you missed any flights?
I actually did miss a flight.
Did you?
I
just guessed that as well.
It's so unlike me, because I travel all the time, and it's the second flight I've missed in my life, and both of them I missed at the airport. So I will say this, because when I was traveling for my birthday,
I literally just guessed.
Yeah, I know, that's crazy. Yeah. No one knows actually. So went to the airport, was flying to Rome, and I was flying to Rome at 9:20 from Gatwick. Yeah, we got to the thing. It was they said it was delayed, so it was waiting. We got to the gate now. Get to the front, and I'm looking. I'm like, why does that say Wizz Air? Because we were flying with Vueling. And the guy behind me goes, oh, there's another 9:20 flight to Rome. We just came from there. And it's that gate, this gate. Yeah. So me and my cousin were like, no way. And we just start running. And by the time we get there, this is like the day before my birthday. And they're like, we can just see we're like, oh, please, is it too late? They're like, it's too late. They said, can you call? We're like, can you call them? And they call them, and they're like, and as they start calling, I can see, the walkway just retracting. Yeah, that was bad. That was bad.
So the last one to end on a positive is, tell us about a recent success. Tell us about something that's gone well recently. Again, in your life, in work, whatever you like.
So I have a lot of them actually, which is
I like to hear that. That's good.
Yeah. So one of my clients, they do a lot of recruitment. They're doing a lot of recruitment, but they've always done all of their recruitment via recruitment agencies. And recruitment agencies are great for some things, but they're expensive. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it'll typically be a 15 to 20% of the, or 15 to 25% of the salary.
Yeah.
So if you hire a 50K person, 20%, you're paying £10,000 on a recruitment fee. So I have, for the first time, filled like 5 vacancies in 1 month for one of my clients, and I've saved them so much money.
For your own recruiting, you do.
So I did it for my client. So my client is the one that my client gets the benefit of that.
Yeah,
like
but you be the hiring manager. You
yeah.
recruiting.
So that's why I was saying I was recruiting for
Amazing, well
compliance
done.
manager. So just that alone had been enough to convince them that they should hire an internal recruiter, and I've saved basically the money that would be that person's salary.
Amazing. Well done.
Yeah,
So
amazing.
HR and recruitment specialist now.
There we go.
I think that wraps it up. I think it's been a really good episode. I had more questions and more discussion points, but we've run out of time. So maybe there'll be a part two
part
of this.
two, maybe.
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on to the show, Lola.
It's been great.
You've been a pleasure and very knowledgeable, actually. So I might be using you in the future for sure. And that's it. Thank you guys for watching and listening to another episode of the Compliance Chronicles. We really appreciate the continual engagement. And over the last week or so, we've hit a new milestone. Got over 2,000 subscribers now. So actually 2,000 people on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis actually care to listen to us. So yeah, we're really ecstatic about that. And we just thank you guys. Continue to, like, comment and subscribe. Turn on your notification bells. And like I said, with us, we really want to give the content that you guys want to listen to. So please engage with us on any of our socials or our personal socials with kind of topics and things that you'd be interested to listen to or hear us talk about, should I say. So thank you so much, guys. And until next episode, take care.
Bye.